Good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca Moffitt, and I'm the Assistant Director at Cvan. I know many of you know what Cvan is. We have been lucky enough to be part of your campaign since the beginning, and we really appreciate it. Some of you have even come out and volunteered your time to help out in our many yards, so we really appreciate that as well. We're very lucky that in Cabarrus County in the very early 80s, when people just really started talking about domestic violence, a task force was formed. That was in 1982, 26 years ago. And we were fortunate that there were folks in the church community, legal community, people who are running into battered women who said that domestic violence happens in our county. It's unfortunate, but domestic violence it's estimated that half of all women will be abused at some point in their lives. It's a leading cause of injury to women in the United States. It's estimated that every 15 seconds a woman is battered. It's also the number one reason that women and children are homeless. 50% of women and children are homeless because of domestic violence. And our county really is no different. That we were very fortunate that by 1982, when the task force formed, the first thing they did, besides forming Cvan as a nonprofit, was start a 24-hour crisis line, and that was in March of 1983. We had 8 calls that month. We now average 100, 225 or more calls every month on our crisis line. And that's been true. I started in '89, and that number has always been true. It's been at least 100 calls every month from women who say that they need a place to go because their homes aren't safe. So it was in August of 1984 that we opened an old 2-story home in downtown Concord that became our shelter. And before they opened it, they had to do a whole lot of renovations. And one of the last things they did was resand and redo a beautiful hardwood floor in our shelter. And it was not quite ready. The last thing they did was put that shellac or whatever you put on hardwood floors. And there was a woman with her 2 kids that every day came by the shelter and kept knocking on the door. And she said, "Is it open yet? Is it open yet? I really need to come." And they said, "Not yet, not yet." But they decided, because she was so persistent and kept coming every day to see if the shelter had opened, that they would open it just a couple of days early. And they did, and that was our first shelter resident. And this was in the early 80s, so she wore those really high spiky heels. And so she walked all over the floor and left literally her pock marks and left her mark all over the floor of the entryway of our shelter. For our 25th anniversary, just in 2007 and through this year, we renovated our shelter buildings because 25 years of wear and tear, you can imagine what that does. All the families, actually 4,000 women and children that we've sheltered. And one of the things we did was redo that hardwood floor. And I remember thinking, well, there goes her pock marks. And it's really literally making room for the next 25 years, generation of women to come. What we've done is developed our services based on what women said that they've needed. On the hotline, they said they needed a shelter, so our community came together and built the shelter, or renovated the shelter. Over time, they said they needed other things. For example, in the law in North Carolina in 1990 changed, allowing women to get orders of protection, or 50B orders, without having to hire an attorney. Before that time, you had to spend a lot of money to hire an attorney to get what's basically a piece of paper from the court that said that he needed to stay away from her. So since that time, women not having to hire an attorney, we wanted to make sure we were there. In fact, this morning, Lori, our court advocate, is there in the courthouse. There's usually about 15 or more women every week who are getting orders of protection. And we know that that's one option for women. It's not a foolproof option. We actually had a woman who in the early 90s got an order of protection, and that did not stop him. He broke into her house and killed her in front of the children. So leaving is a very dangerous time for women. So we not only help women on the front end leaving, but after she's left. Women are 7 times more likely to be killed after they've left an abuser or while they're trying to leave. So we have what's called a formerly battered women's program. Women, after they've left, can come and get support from us. They can come back for our support groups, which happen every Tuesday night. They can come talk with our advocate. They can certainly call on our crisis line. And we can strategize with them around safety, because in particular that first year can be very dangerous. Other programs that we have, mentioned the support group, the court program. We have, around the holidays, we get a lot of support from you, from the community as a whole, and we can pass that along to the families over the holidays. A lot of the donations that we get over just the course of a day, we pass directly on to the women and children. We have a teen program. That's where we go out into the schools. We've been into the high schools and are really starting to get into the middle schools to talk to teens, because we know that violence doesn't begin when people become adults. It begins as early as boys and girls start dating. So we have a 2-day curriculum where we talk about what we call dating violence. So we really appreciate all that you all do, and the support that you've given us over the years. I'll just end it with a little story that I also like to tell when I'm ever in front of a group, especially when I'm talking in a workplace giving setting. I was doing my first talk around that. This was probably in 94, 95, and I was a little bit anxious, and I did my little piece, and at the end of my 5 minutes, there was a woman who was sitting, it was in a break room, and she was sitting there with all her coworkers, and she raised her hand, and she said, "Did you say your name was Rebecca?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I spoke to you on the crisis line about a year ago, and you really helped me. You all really helped me. Things are much better now, and I really appreciate you being there." And I thought, well, what was I nervous about? She had the courage to say in front of her coworkers that she actually had to call our crisis line. There should not be that stigma, but unfortunately there still is. But she had the courage to say, "Thank you for being there," and I always remember that. So thank you for being there as well, and for your consideration, and for your time today. Thank you, Rebecca.